My name is Melissa Barreto, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm also the child of an alcoholic. Growing up in alcoholism was pretty terrifying. My dad was the alcoholic, and when he was sober, he could be very charming. And, at some point in the day that would change, and he would turn into a different person, very rageful and violent and abusive. And I just suffered from emotional trauma and abuse, and I felt like I was constantly trying to stay out of sight and keep under his radar so that I wouldn't be in any kind of line of fire. I would be very confused. He would say that he loved me, and then he would hurt me, and I would watch family members get hurt, and I would be told that I didn't see anything or that didn't happen. And I just learned to basically be self-sufficient, and I couldn't trust anybody. I couldn't rely on anyone. I learned to just kind of stuff emotions away, or I'd frequently be told that quit your crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And so I just learned to really kind of stuff everything down and hide all of that. So coping with alcoholism, I really developed maladaptive coping mechanisms as a child. They were really just survival strategies, trying to learn how to navigate through this pretty traumatic environment. I kept myself pretty busy. I became an athlete. I became a pianist, and I did really well in school. Despite all of this stuff happening, I just really maxed myself out. And that really turned into being, an overachiever and a perfectionist. And I like to say now, overly stressed out, affecting my health. I had some weird illnesses as a child. I got shingles and cat scratch fever and things that didn't really make sense because I'm sure my immune system was compromised living in such a stressful environment. And, I had to also get a job pretty young to help pay bills because my mom ended up taking on 2 jobs to make ends meet because bills were stacking up. My dad was spending all of the money on alcohol and cigarettes, and so she ended up working 2 jobs to try to make the ends meet. And she started a family business that I ended up running pretty much from I think I was 10 or 11 years old, and I did all the in-house stuff for that business while going to school and doing the other things that I was trying to do as a child. But I really learned to work to help provide for the family. We lived in pretty, with low means. I would say probably at the poverty level. I mean, there were times we didn't have groceries, and there were times we didn't have electricity, and times we didn't have heat, and it was cold, and there were mice and cockroaches and bugs and running around scampering around the house, and bugs in the food, and I was told I needed to eat that because that's all we had. And so I did. So coping, really, I would say just keeping myself really busy, and I tried to stay out of the house as much as possible. And I just learned these survival strategies that were not really effective. Just be thinking that I could be self-reliant and that I could be perfect. I thought if I was perfect that my dad would eventually love me, that he wouldn't abuse me anymore. I just didn't realize when I was such a young child that perfectionism is unattainable. And I really just tried to control everything that I possibly could. Control was a huge factor and can still affect me to this day. Trying to control everything in my environment. That was a way that I thought I could, if I could control my environment, then, I could be safe. That was the illusion I had anyway. And so I just tried to control everything. I tried to run the house for my mom, and yeah, I ended up getting severely depressed. I didn't realize I was depressed and anxious as a child. I decided at one point I was just so over all of it that I went into the bathroom at my elementary school and I tried to commit suicide, and praise God, I wasn't successful in that. And later on, I found alcohol as a coping mechanism. At 9 years old, my parents were really partying and they didn't want to stop partying, and we were on a river floating and they had their alcohol, and I was incredibly freezing cold, and I wanted to get off the river so badly, and they just didn't want to stop drinking, and so they gave me their alcohol and told me to drink it, and I did. And at 9 years old was the first time I was drunk, and I realized, oh, okay, so you use alcohol to numb all of this pain. And so I proceeded from that point on. I started looking around for my dad's half-empty beer cans lying around the house, and when he wasn't watching, I would drink them, and that started to become a form for me to cope with what was going on. As a child, my mom, she told me that God existed. We didn't really consistently or regularly go to church, but I knew there was a God. I just felt that with all the stuff happening at my house, that if God existed, then he must either be very cruel or, I did something wrong, because why wasn't he saving me from this situation? And I used to ask my mom to leave my dad, and she I think was just in a really difficult situation, so she wouldn't ever answer that question. But I just felt very invisible and alone, and my picture of God was that he was a harsh and cruel God to have me be living in this situation. And I was desperately trying to escape this situation. I would watch my siblings get brutally just tormented and awful things, and then be told that you didn't see that. And I felt like I couldn't trust my eyes. I couldn't trust my parents. I couldn't trust God. And so in high school, I started drinking, and I also found my way to drugs, and I started drinking and using drugs every single day while also excelling by the grace of God in school, because at some point I realized that if I could stay high functioning and excel, then I could escape my family of origin. And I knew at 18, I had a plan that at 18 I was going to leave and I was never going to come back. And that was my ticket out, was to get into a good college. So at 18, that's exactly what I did. I moved out. I started supporting myself. I took loans out to get through school, and I got a job, and I went through school, and I moved to Southern California. And I thought that if I moved away, that I was escaping all of this, but somehow everything was still so negative, and I was still depressed and drinking, and I was such a harsh self-judge too. I really beat myself up. I was never good enough. I wasn't worthy. And I just decided, okay, well, I guess I'm not far enough away. I could still get, information of the dramas going on at home from family. So I decided to move to France, and I moved to France, and one day while I was there, I was on the metro, and I really had a moment that for me, it was a pivotal moment that changed my relationship with God. These two small children, they came up to me on the metro, and they were probably 3 and 4 years old, and they were just absolutely starving to death, and they were begging me for my food. And I just got so angry at God, because how could he let these things happen? And so I decided that there must not be a God, and I became an atheist. And I started going on from that point, continuing with my addictions. I actually needed to pick up another addiction because, drugs and alcohol wasn't enough. So I started smoking cigarettes, and I still was not satisfied. So shortly after that, I came back from France, and my dad called me because while I was in France, there was an incident with my mom, and my mom said that he tried to kill her with one of his guns, and she escaped, but she finally decided to leave him. And I supported her choosing her safety, and my dad was very upset about that. So when I got back from France, he called me on the phone, and he was in a drunken rage, and he was just screaming at me so belligerently that it was my fault that my mom was going to leave him, and just basically blaming me for the divorce. And it got so nasty that I ended up hanging up on him. And I was just sinking into a depression. I have a very dear friend. Her name is Emma Rinker, and she must have sensed that I was just really falling apart, because she bought me my first Bible. I had never read the Bible before that. And she also bought me Steps to Christ. And that was my saving moment. I mean, that really, finding God through his true character and realizing that God is a loving God, that he does exist, and that he cares about me, and that I'm worthy. And that really started working me down the path of healing. And then I met who would later become my husband. I met Bill, and Bill was one of the first people that I learned to trust. He loved me unconditionally, and he supported me despite all my flaws. And ironically, he is also a recovering alcoholic. So, God must have known that I needed somebody with recovery in my life, because Bill taught me a lot about recovery and about AA, and he supported me, and he was very gentle with me. He never told me I needed to go to these recovery programs, but he informed me about them. And I was still heavy in my addictions and not ready to relinquish that. But then Bill and I got married, and my dad did not come to the wedding. I really did want him there, but he chose not to come. And 3 months after that, I got a phone call that my dad had unexpectedly and suddenly died from a ruptured brain aneurysm. And that was the moment that I needed, because I fell apart. I was struggling, just years of trauma and, emotional starvation from childhood just came flooding forward. And I just had so much guilt that I was dealing with. I thought that I could have saved him and that it was my fault. And why didn't I fix him? And, you know, all of these shoulda, coulda, woulda situations that weren't helping anything. And I was encouraged by my mother-in-law to go to Al-Anon, which is a 12-step program for people who are affected by someone else's addiction. And the healing that I received in Al-Anon was absolutely just, it really transformed my life, and it brought me so close to God. I got to work the 12 steps of the program, and I got to build a healthy and close relationship with God that I had never had before. He was so patient with me, and he just worked with me so gently, working on one character defect at a time. I had a lot that I needed to process and a lot that I needed to change. There was just starting with the fact that I needed to learn that alcoholism was a disease, and that specifically of the part of your brain where choices get made, because I had struggled for so long that why it wasn't my dad choosing me over alcohol. But when I learned that, it set me free. It helped me realize that I didn't cause it, and I cannot control it, and I certainly cannot cure it. And, that helped me realize I can't control other people, and I'm not responsible for that. And I can be gentle with myself and forgiving, and it wasn't my responsibility to save my dad. I could only change myself. I realized that it wasn't, I kept thinking that if all these other people changed, then my life would be better. But Al-Anon helped teach me that it wasn't the other people that needed to change. It was really that I needed to change, that it was me, that if I could change my perspective, then I could change my life. If I could choose to have an attitude of gratitude, then I could find joy. I didn't have to be so negative or, reliving the past, which I used to relive the past, and I used to obsess over the future and catastrophize and worry and nitpick and just live in such this pessimistic world. And God gave me hope and showed me that life can be joyful and optimistic, and I can find faith and happiness. And it was really that I needed to change, that I needed to develop my character with God. And once I realized that when I try to control everything, my life becomes unmanageable. But if I can daily turn my will and my life over to Jesus, then everything changes. God restored me to sanity, and he delivered me from pain and trauma, and eventually he delivered me from my addictions as well. I was still holding on to my addictions. I did not want to let that go. I was working on the character defects, and God had also, pushed me in the direction of finding compassion, actually, for my parents, finding forgiveness, realizing that they themselves had messed up childhoods, and I needed to forgive them too, and making my own amends too. I needed to repair damages that I had made wherever I could, so that I could be free from my sins and from the hurt that I had caused. I learned something along the way that was helpful for me to not hold on to. Guilt was that hurt people, they hurt people. And that's exactly what I did. And I needed to make amends and make things right and clean up my side of the street wherever I could. And eventually, God kept telling me that I needed to relinquish my addictions, and I was holding on to that, and I didn't want to. I felt like it would be too difficult to let it go. And just I finally decided that I needed to go to AA, and I went. And one day at a time, I just kept surrendering to Jesus. And I told myself, just for today, I will not use that substance. Just for today, I won't use that substance. And one day at a time, I continued to have less craving, because I did still have craving at first, but I would pray that Jesus would take it away, and miraculously he would. When I would pray for that, he would take it away, and I could make it through that day. And then the next day would come and the craving would be less, and the next day would come and it would be less. And I have now been sober for 9 years from all of my addictions, and I have zero craving. So for any of you that are out there that are suffering from addiction or from the effects of someone else's addiction, I can tell you with certainty that Jesus will give you the healing that you need. You need to ask him to be in your heart and to turn your will and your life over to him each day, and pray continuously to him, and just claim the promises that are in the Bible. And he will transform your life. He will change you. He will give you the victory that you're so desperately seeking. He will bring you the hope that you need. He loves you, and you owe it to yourself, because you are worthy. You are worthy, and he loves you.